Cancel the afternoon fittings. My mother, Brenda, said. She swiped my leather appointment book off the counter. She did not say hello. She dropped her oversized designer handbag directly onto my cutting table, knocking over a tray of glass pins. You are moving your machine to my basement tonight, she said. Maya needs 14 dresses by Saturday, and you are doing it. I looked at the VIP client standing frozen by the mirrors. Before I could speak, Brenda pulled out her phone and dialed my younger sister. She spoke loudly enough for the whole shop to hear. Don't invite her to the rehearsal dinner. Her hands will be too busy fixing our hems anyway. I did not cry. I did not beg her to lower her voice. I just closed my measuring tape. Brenda thought she was merely confiscating my time. She did not realize she was handing me the exact tool I needed to dismantle her perfect image. Before we get to the basement, tell me where you are listening from and what the weather is like today. I want to see how far this story travels. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My name is Chloe. I am 30 years old, and I spent the last 7 years building my custom tailoring boutique from nothing. Maya, the youngest daughter and the absolute favorite, was getting married in a lavish weekend ceremony. For months, Brenda had bragged to the extended family and the groom's parents about her generosity. She told everyone she was fully funding the bridal party's attire out of her own pocket. It was her grand gift to the couple. After my client grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, I turned to Brenda. I have a business to run. I cannot close the shop for a week to sew 14 complex gowns for free. Brenda tightened her grip on the straps of her designer bag. She never let that bag out of her sight. Her voice dropped to that quiet, sharp tone she saved just for me. You are my daughter, she said. If you ruin your sister's wedding because you want to be selfish, I will tell Aunt Sarah and everyone else flying in exactly why. Don't bother showing up for Thanksgiving. You will be dead to this family. The threat hung in the quiet shop. It was not an empty bluff. She had isolated me from the family before, cutting me off for months whenever I refused a demand. I looked at the intricate beadwork on my table. I had spent 3 hours perfecting it. Then I looked at Brenda, demanding my labor as if she owned the bones in my hands. I did not raise my voice. I walked to the back room and brought out a cardboard box. I packed my shears, my needles, and a spool of silver thread. I unplugged the industrial sewing machine. Brenda watched me, completely satisfied. Assuming she had won, I carried the heavy box to my car. She had no idea what was coming. The basement was waiting. The basement smelled of damp concrete and old pine. The single overhead bulb cast a yellow circle over the heavy industrial sewing machine. Above me, the ceiling boards vibrated. Brenda's rehearsal dinner had started 2 hours ago. I could hear the muffled bass of the music and the sharp clink of silverware. I was not allowed up there. Brenda had made that clear before she shut the door to the hallway. She told everyone my hands were too dirty, covered in pinpricks and fabric dye, to sit at a table with the groom's wealthy parents. She needed to keep me completely separated from the people who were actually funding the wedding. I kept my foot on the pedal. The needle punched through 3 layers of heavy white silk. The low, steady hum of the motor filled the small room, drowning out the laughter from upstairs. I finished the hem on the second dress and cut the thread. My fingers were stiff. A fresh blister had torn open on the side of my thumb. It burned every time I pulled the fabric tight. A sharp reminder of the hours I was losing. I needed a different bodice pattern for the next gown. I stood up and pulled open the bottom drawer of Brenda's wooden storage cabinet. The smell of dry, aging paper drifted up. I flipped through the thick stacks of manila envelopes. Searching for the right cut, my hands brushed past the pattern for the heavy winter curtains I made for her living room 4 years ago. Behind it was the design for Maya's high school prom dress. I had sewn that when I was 22, working entirely through my college finals. Brenda had used the exact same words every single time. Family helps family. Chloe, You don't charge your own mother. That is just greedy. I looked at the thick stack of envelopes. For 10 years, I had accepted that excuse. I had given up weekends, holidays, and tens of thousands of dollars in lost professional wages just to keep the peace. My youth and my labor were folded up and stored in these dusty drawers, entirely unpaid. I pushed the cabinet closed. I walked back to the machine. But I did not sit down to sew. Instead, I reached into my tote bag. I pulled out a small, wire-bound notebook and a black pen. I opened to the first blank page. I wrote down the current date. I looked at my watch and wrote down the exact minute Brenda had forced me into the basement. Then, I wrote down my standard hourly boutique rate. It was a quiet, necessary action, but it cost me. My blistered hand shook slightly as I gripped the pen, and my eyes burned from the lack of sleep. A sudden burst of cheering erupted from the living room directly above my head. I recognized Maya's bright, echoing laugh. She sounded completely thrilled. I stared up at the wooden planks. Maya was the center of attention, floating through her perfect weekend. Did my youngest sister actually know Brenda was using me as an unpaid factory worker? Or had Brenda convinced her that she generously paid for a professional service? I clicked my pen shut. The numbers were adding up. Maya came down the wooden stairs at noon, balancing a small porcelain plate with 2 lemon tarts. She was wearing her silk robe, her hair pinned up for her bridal trial. She set the plate directly onto the edge of my sewing table, avoiding the pile of discarded pins. "Mom said you've been working down here all night," Maya said, her voice bright and breathless. I told her she was being way too demanding, but she said you insisted on taking the contract. I paused my foot on the pedal. "The contract," Maya smiled, leaning against the wooden support beam. "She told us how much she's paying you." "Chloe. She bragged to Greg's parents at dinner last night about supporting your boutique and paying your full commercial rate for all 14 dresses. She said it was her personal gift to us so we wouldn't have to hire a stranger." The air in the basement felt suddenly thin. I looked at my younger sister. Her cheeks were flushed with genuine excitement. She was 25 years old, completely thrilled, and entirely oblivious. Brenda had not just stolen my time, she had used my unpaid labor to buy herself a reputation of grand generosity with the groom's wealthy family. I opened my mouth. The words were right at the back of my throat. I was going to tell her that Mom hadn't paid me a single dollar, that she had canceled my paying clients, and that she had threatened to erase me from the family if I didn't comply. Before I could speak, the heavy door at the top of the stairs banged open against the drywall. Maya Brenda's voice sliced through the stairwell. Sharp and impatient. "The shoe consultant is on the phone. Get up here right now. Don't waste time chatting down there." Maya gave me an apologetic shrug, patted my shoulder, and turned back up the steps. The door clicked shut behind her. Cutting off the light from the hallway, I stood alone in the quiet again. The lemon tarts untouched beside my shears. That evening, the house above went completely dark. Brenda, my father, and Maya had left for a late-night venue walkthrough across town. I worked until my eyes blurred, finishing the bodice of the 3rd gown. I needed another spool of heavy silver thread to finish the trim on the cuffs. I knelt down by the old storage cabinet in the corner, pulling out the bottom wooden crate where spare spools were kept. As I reached into the dark back corner, my fingers brushed against something thick and stiff beneath a stack of discarded felt sheets. It was a large, unsealed white envelope. It was heavy, made of high-grade cardstock. On the front, in clear printed ink, was the letterhead of a prominent local event agency. I pulled it out into the yellow light of the bulb. This was what had slipped out of Brenda's designer bag when she dropped it onto my cutting table 2 days ago. I unfolded the thick document inside. I slid my fingernail under the flap of the thick envelope, The basement was completely silent except for the low hum of the dehumidifier in the corner. It was past 2 in the morning. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet of paper. The letterhead belonged to a luxury event planning agency downtown. It was a finalized budget invoice for the wedding. I ran my finger down the itemized list until I reached the wardrobe section. There was a printed line item for custom bridal party attire, billed directly to the groom's wealthy parents. The amount was $14,500. That printed number had been crossed out with a red ballpoint pen. In the right margin, Brenda had written a note in her unmistakable, looping handwriting. It was the same handwriting that used to sign my birthday cards. Transfer full amount to my private checking. Chloe is handling the labor. I touched the red ink. It was indented deeply into the paper. Pressed hard. She had signed off on this theft with total confidence. Brenda was not just saving money on the wedding budget. She was actively cashing out on my exhaustion. I set the heavy paper down on the wooden cutting table. I opened my wire-bound notebook. I looked at the timesheet I had started for the evening. My thumb was still bleeding sluggishly into a bandage. I ignored it. I took my pen, turned to a fresh page, and began to create a new list. I did not write down memories or grievances. I wrote down the hours. 40 hours for the heavy winter curtains. 60 hours for Maya's high school prom dress. 120 hours for my cousin's bridal party 2 years ago. I multiplied every stolen weekend by my standard hourly boutique rate. Then, I added the $14,500 she was currently pocketing for the silk gowns sitting unfinished across the room. The final number was $38,920. That was the exact price of Brenda's conditional love. It was an invisible debt that had been compounding in the shadows for a decade. The stinging in my blistered hand faded into a cold, flat focus. I looked at the red ink on the invoice, then at the massive stack of uncut white silk sitting by my machine. Brenda had built her entire flawless reputation on the assumption that I would never stop sewing. She believed my loyalty was a machine she could leave plugged in forever. I folded the invoice carefully. I slipped it inside the front cover of my notebook. The math was finally finished. Now, I just had to deliver it. I finished the 4th hem at 3 in the morning. I cut the silver thread and laid the heavy silk across the back of the folding chair. That was exactly 1/4 of the bridal party. I looked at the remaining 10 piles of fabric. I did not throw them on the floor. I did not cut them to pieces. I stood at the cutting table and spent the next 4 hours assembling the rough frames. I basted the side seams. I attached the basic linings. I left the bodices open and the hems raw. Any competent tailor could step in and finish them by tomorrow afternoon. The bridesmaids would not have to walk down the aisle naked. I had no intention of punishing Maya's friends for my mother's greed, but whoever finished these gowns was going to charge premium rush fees. Brenda was going to have to open her stolen budget and pay for every single stitch. At 7 in the morning, the basement was still and quiet. I looked at the industrial sewing machine. For 10 years, I had believed that keeping this machine running was the only way to keep my place in the family. I thought my exhaustion was the rent I had to pay to belong. Sitting there in the damp cold, I watched the metal needle. Brenda did not love me. She loved the quiet hum of this motor. She loved the convenience of a daughter who never handed her a bill. I reached down to the wall outlet. I grabbed the thick black cord and pulled it. The heavy motor spun down with a low whine, finally settling into absolute silence. I was no longer operating it. I packed my fabric shears and my measuring tape back into my cardboard box. I took the red-inked invoice and my wire-bound notebook, sliding them both into the secure zipper pocket of my tote bag. I walked up the wooden stairs. The house above me was completely silent. Brenda was asleep in the master bedroom, dreaming of her flawless, heavily subsidized weekend. I stepped out through the side entry door. I pulled it shut and used my spare key to lock the basement from the outside. I drove 2 hours north into the mountains. The sun came up over the tree line, burning off the morning fog. I did not turn the radio on. I just listened to the tires on the asphalt. My hands were still stiff, my thumb throbbing against the steering wheel. But the heavy weight in my chest was gone. I pulled into the gravel driveway of a secluded hot spring resort just before 9. The lobby was empty except for an older woman working behind the reception desk. She looked at my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes. "Checking in early?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She handed me a heavy brass room key and a complimentary ceramic mug of hot chamomile tea. "You look like you've been carrying the world," she said, offering a warm, quiet smile. "It's peaceful up here. Nobody will bother you." I took the warm mug. That is exactly what I need. I walked to my room on the second floor. I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the private wooden balcony. The air was freezing, sharp with the scent of pine. Below me, the hot springs sent thick white steam up into the trees. I sat down in the wooden deck chair. I wrapped both of my blistered hands around the hot ceramic. I looked at my phone sitting on the small table. The wedding photographer was scheduled to arrive at the studio in 3 hours. The bridesmaids would be asking for their dresses. Brenda would be walking down to the basement, expecting to find me hunched over the machine. What would she do when she found an empty room? I took a sip of my tea. Let her figure it out. The phone vibrated violently against the wooden balcony table. It was 8 in the morning. I picked it up and looked at the screen. There were 42 missed calls. The notifications were a solid wall of panic. The bridesmaids were texting about missing garment bags. Maya had left 3 voicemails asking if I had gotten a flat tire on the way to the studio. Then, Brenda's name flashed on the screen for the 43rd time. I swiped to answer and held the phone to my ear. "Chloe." "Honey," Brenda said. She did not scream. She did not threaten to banish me from Thanksgiving. Her voice had dropped into a soft, warm register. It was the exact tone she used when speaking to the groom's wealthy parents at the rehearsal dinner. It was a flawless pivot. "We are having a slight logistical issue at the studio," she said gently. "The girls really need to start getting dressed." I watched the thick white steam rise from the hot springs below. I took a sip of my tea. I said nothing. I know the timeline was tight. Brenda continued, quickly filling the silence. "I have been thinking about it all morning, and I want to be fair. I am willing to make a compromise. Family should support family, but I want to show my appreciation for your hard work." She paused. I could hear the sharp clatter of makeup brushes and frantic voices in the background. "If you pack the dresses and drive down here right now," Brenda said, lowering her voice so the room could not hear, "I will dip into my personal savings. I can offer you $500 for your time. It is a lot of money, Chloe, but I am happy to do it." She let the number hang in the air. She expected it to land like a grand, generous blessing. $500. She was offering me a fraction of the $14,500 she had secretly pocketed, framing it as a mother's ultimate sacrifice. I listened closely to the receiver. Beneath the smooth, reasonable tone, I heard a faint tremor in her breathing. She was standing in a room full of waiting women, staring at the clock, terrified of losing her perfect image. She truly believed a petty bribe could buy her way out of the trap. "I will transfer it the moment you walk through the door," Brenda urged, the warmth in her voice cracking just an inch. "Just get here." I did not argue. I did not ask her about the event agency invoice. I smiled at the sharp, cold mountain air, pulled the phone away from my ear, and pressed the red button. I set the device face down on the table. She had made her final offer. Now, it was time for my reply. I stood on the quiet wooden balcony and smoothed the event agency invoice flat against the table. I placed my timesheet right next to it. I opened the family group chat, a thread containing 24 people. including every aunt, uncle, and the groom's parents. I snapped a clear photograph of the red ink and the hourly math. I pressed send. I did not type a caption. The numbers were enough. 60 seconds later, my screen lit up with a FaceTime call from Maya. I answered. She did not say hello. The camera shook, showing her pale face in the cramped, brightly lit studio fitting room. The groom's wealthy mother, Aunt Sarah, and 3 makeup artists were standing directly behind her. Maya's eyes were locked on her own phone in her other hand. She had just opened the photograph in the group chat. "Where did you get this?" Maya asked. Her voice echoed over the speaker. Before I could answer, Brenda lunged across the camera frame. She clawed at Maya's hands, trying to snatch the device away. "It is a fake!" Brenda screamed. "Chloe is lying. She fabricated it. Turn that off right now." Maya stepped back, keeping the screen out of reach. She looked from the red ink on the digital invoice to our mother's face. For 10 years, Brenda had spun stories about my selfishness to isolate me. Now, the truth was undeniable, and Maya was finally looking at it. Maya reached forward and snatched the heavy gold credit card straight out of Brenda's hand. "I am calling the emergency bridal tailors," Maya said. Her voice shook, but it was loud enough for the entire room to hear. "And you are paying their $3,000 same-day rush fee right now." Brenda reached out to grab the card back, but she lost her balance. Her knees buckled. She hit the floor hard. The oversized designer handbag slipped off her shoulder, hitting the tiles and spilling completely open. Lipsticks, loose coins, and a thick stack of recent casino withdrawal receipts scattered perfectly at the groom's mother's feet. The older woman looked down at the stamped casino papers, then up at Brenda. "You stole our dress budget to cover gambling debts," she asked. She did not raise her voice. Brenda stayed on the floor, her hands trembling over the scattered receipts. She looked up at Aunt Sarah and the other relatives in the room, the same people who had spent years mocking my single status to protect her. None of them defended her. Aunt Sarah stared firmly at her own shoes. Maya looked into the camera. "Thank you, Chloe," she said quietly. She ended the call. The screen went dark. I picked up my ceramic mug. The tea was still warm. It was past 10 o'clock when my phone vibrated against the wooden nightstand. The screen glowed in the dark room, displaying an unknown local number. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. It was Brenda. The sharp, authoritative tone she had used my entire life was completely gone. Her breathing was ragged, and I could hear the distinct sound of a car engine running in the background. She was crying. She begged me to delete the photographs of the invoice from the family group chat. She said Maya's new in-laws were horrified. They were demanding to review the catering and venue contracts to check if she had stolen from those budgets. 2. Her flawless, wealthy image was collapsing by the hour. "Please, Chloe," she sobbed into the receiver. "Just log in and delete it. Tell them you were confused. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will do whatever you want." I listened to the wet tremor in her voice. A week ago, hearing my mother cry would have broken my heart. I would have rushed to fix whatever was hurting her. Now, it just sounded like an empty machine winding down. She was not apologizing for stealing my time or my money. She was begging me to repair her reputation. "I am not fixing your hems," I said quietly, "and I am not fixing your lies." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. I opened my settings and blocked the unknown number. The room became perfectly silent again. The fireplace cast a warm, orange glow across the wooden floorboards of the cabin. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled my heavy tote bag into my lap. I reached past the wire-bound notebook and the thick paper of the event agency invoice. My fingers found the large spool of silver thread. I pulled it out. It was the only physical thing I had brought with me from the damp basement. I held the spool in my blistered hands. I did not cry. I just ran my sore thumb over the stiff, metallic fibers. The metal felt cold against my skin. The thread was strong enough to hold heavy silk together, but I knew it could never hold a mother and a daughter. I had my freedom. And the permanent price was knowing that I was truly an orphan. A wedding dress stitched with resentment will never cover up the ugly truth of a family that treats you like a machine. I know exactly what you are screaming at your screen right now. You are leaning forward, asking, why did Chloe stay in that damp basement for 3 days? Why did she waste 10 years sewing free curtains and prom dresses before she finally packed up her machine? It is so easy to judge from the outside. But when you are trapped inside a toxic family dynamic, it operates exactly like a slot machine in a casino. You pull the lever over and over. You put in your time, your money, your youth, and you get nothing but silence. You start to believe that if you just pull the lever one more time, if you just sew one more dress or host one more holiday, the jackpot of genuine parental love will finally drop. You are just about to walk away. And then ding, the machine spits out a tiny coin, a warm tone of voice on the phone, a fake promise of a $500 bribe masked as motherly generosity, a single compliment at a rehearsal dinner. That breadcrumb of hope keeps you sitting at the stool. You aren't foolish, and you aren't weak. You are just addicted to the illusion that if you work hard enough and give enough of yourself, your mother will finally love you instead of just using you for convenience. But Chloe finally stepped away from the machine, and she did it brilliantly. Let's look at the 3 self-defense moves she used to dismantle Brenda's control. Moves you can remember if you ever find yourself in a similar trap. First, she used the silent audit. Instead of arguing with a woman who refused to listen, Chloe sat in the dark and documented the exact financial value of her stolen time. She stopped dealing in emotional grievances and turned her abuse into cold, hard math. Abusers thrive on vague guilt. They cannot argue with an itemized bill. Second, she used the controlled burn. Chloe didn't ruin the wedding out of pure spite. She basted the raw frames of the dresses, ensuring the innocent bridesmaids weren't left humiliated on the big day. But she strategically forced Brenda to hire premium emergency tailors, making the financial hit land exactly where it belonged, directly on Brenda's secret gambling fund. She burned the abuser's resources, not the innocent bystanders. Finally, she deployed the public ledger. Chloe didn't confront Brenda privately, where lies could be spun, tears could be faked, and gaslighting thrives. She dropped the red-inked invoice directly into the family group chat, letting the truth detonate in plain sight. Sunlight is the best disinfectant for a family that relies on secrets to maintain an image. Your time, your professional skills, and your love are not free commodities for your relatives to harvest. If they treat you like a household appliance, you have every right to unplug yourself and walk out the door. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member who only loved what you could do for them? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Subscribe to the channel, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.